Hey there, Angela Mosley here. In today's video, I'm going to talk to you about the difference between a tight pelvic floor and a weak pelvic floor. This is the question I get more often than not, is how do I know if I have a tight pelvic floor or a weak pelvic floor? And I just want to say the most common is that most women will have posterior pelvic floor tightness with front pelvic floor weakness. And there's a lot of overlap between weakness and tightness in regards to symptoms. So in today's video, I'm going to do my best to share it, and then make sure to check down below because of course I have mom brain, so I'm not going to remember everything, but I've made sure to break down everything down below for you. I also want to say that the only true way to get a true diagnosis of the state of your pelvic floor is by going to see an internal pelvic floor PT. They can do an internal assessment on your pelvic floor and determine if you have tightness or if you have weakness. It's also possible that you could have tightness on one side and weakness on the other. And just like I said, a lot of women will have posterior pelvic floor tightness with front pelvic floor weakness. Now, how you get in to see a pelvic floor PT, you're going to contact your OB. You're going to ask them for a referral. Be an advocate for yourself. If you have any of these symptoms, whether weakness or tightness today, I want you to go to your OB, ask for a referral, and get in to see pelvic floor PT. I don't know why this isn't a standard when women have a symptoms or when they have a baby. Like, it should just be a part of our care plan, but it's not. So, and you're here, you're learning, so now you know. So go spread the word, share it with other moms. I truly believe every mom needs to get into pelvic floor PT because we all have some kind of compensation or barrier post-birth that we can fix with corrective exercises and rehab, okay? So there is a lot of overlap when it comes to leaking, or I'm sorry, there's a lot of overlap when it comes to a tight pelvic floor and a weak pelvic floor, such as leaking. Whether you're leaking with sneezing, you're leaking with jumping, running, weight training, anything of the sort, you have leaking, and that could be caused because of a tight pelvic floor, or it could be from a weak pelvic floor. Same thing is true with prolapse healing. So if you have a prolapse, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have weakness, right? I have a stage 2 rectocele and a stage 1 cystocele that was a stage 2, and I had a lot of tension in my posterior pelvic floor. I still get tension down there because that's where my body holds on to stress. And so I have to be really mindful and proactive with it, because I can notice that if I have a lot of stress and a lot of tension, I do get flare-ups in my prolapse, especially when it comes to constipation, which we're going to get to in a little bit. So just be mindful of that. And this is also another reason why getting in to see a pelvic floor PT is extremely important, because yes, these symptoms can definitely lead you one way or another. And especially, like I said, read the caption below on more details, because I will forget some symptoms, but it doesn't give you a diagnosis. So that's why it's important to go in to see a pelvic floor PT who could do that assessment. Okay, so let's start with tightness, because I feel like that's more common than the weakness. So number one, if you are prescribed kegels and symptoms are either getting worse or you're not getting any improvement. So if you know me or you've purchased any of my programs, you know that I don't do isolated kegels. Didn't do them for myself. I don't prescribe them for my people, and they're not inside my programs. What we do is called a co-contraction with our breath. So we use our breath to lengthen the pelvic floor and activate the pelvic floor in a more functional way. So if you were given kegels and your symptoms are getting worse, that's a sure tell sign that kegels are not the answer, and you probably have pelvic floor tightness. But then also, if you're using kegels and it's not making any changes within your pelvic floor, that's a sign that you have some pelvic floor tightness. If you have to push your gas out, so if you find that gas doesn't just easily release and you really have to like bear down to push your gas out, that's a sign that you have posterior pelvic floor tightness. If you have symptoms of a UTI without an official diagnosis of a UTI, that is a sign of front pelvic floor tightness. So if you are someone that constantly goes to your doctor and you're constantly getting UTIs, and maybe they're prescribing you these meds, maybe they're saying, oh yeah, it's a UTI, but it keeps reoccurring, I would highly encourage you to get a second opinion, because it really could just be front pelvic floor tightness that you're dealing with that needs to be addressed without medication. So that is one thing that I want you to be aware of. Just a little tip. Again, I don't have a medical background, but just some things that I identify here and I want you to be aware of. Starting the urine aflow. So if you feel like you struggle to start the flow of urine, what can happen is you can have a kink in the urethra, and that kink can prevent the urine from coming out fully. And that would be, again, front pelvic floor tightness. That would keep it, or if it's like kind of choppy and it doesn't come out very smoothly, that could be a sign of front pelvic floor tightness. Experiencing tension with insertion such as a tampon or intercourse, you feel pain, it's super uncomfortable. That could be a sign of pelvic floor tension and pelvic floor tightness. Constipation, of course, just like the gas. If you are not able to, if you've increased your fiber intake, you've increased your water intake, and you still have constipation, then this is a sign that you could have posterior pelvic floor tension. Prolapse symptoms not healing despite trying to do, a bunch of kegels, or maybe you've gone down the rabbit hole of hypopressives. Did not do hypopressives, but just things like that, and you're wondering why your prolapse isn't healing. It could be because you have pelvic floor tightness. And I'm going to show you a couple things on some of my props that I have here so you can kind of give a visual of how that would work when it comes to tension. All right, so again, make sure to check the caption down below because I may have missed some symptoms. So let's go into weakness. Weakness is basically the opposite of tightness, right? So you are not able to hold your urine in, especially with easy impact, like just by stepping up the stairs, for example, and you immediately leak. That could be from weakness because the pelvic floor is not contracting to keep the urine in. Having not loose stool, but definitely not loose stool, but if you're not able to hold your stool in and you're not able to hold your gas in and it kind of just comes out. Now there could be a couple signs of that. There could be constipation and some of that stool just leaks around it. I see that often with my son. And so for that would be a tension thing. But if you're not able to hold it in, and that would be a good sign that you have some weakness, especially in that posterior pelvic floor. Not having any sensation with intercourse, so not being able to orgasm or enjoy the pleasure, because that could be a sign that you have pelvic floor weakness, because of the fact that you're not able to orgasm because the pelvic floor is not contracting. When we have an orgasm, our pelvic floor contracts. And so in order for us to, have an orgasm, we have to have a solid functioning pelvic floor. A dragging sensation, so you just feel super vulnerable. You feel like everything just keeps dragging, heaviness sensation, and you just feel like things are falling out because you could have that sensation of a prolapse without actually having a prolapse diagnosis. And so it could just be severe weakness within the pelvic floor. Now, I will say this, that up to 50% of women that get an internal exam are diagnosed with a prolapse. So this is why, again, that every woman should go to get a physical pelvic floor exam post-birth. Now, I will say that postpartum period, you're going to have more laxity in the pelvic floor. And so you might have what appears to be a prolapse, but then with time and with healing, and once you've completed breastfeeding, if that's your plan for your baby, the pelvic floor will start to bring back its elasticity because estrogen has come back up, because estrogen is the female hormone that helps to support the muscles, the strength in the muscles in the pelvic floor. So just note that first year postpartum, especially if you are breastfeeding, things are gonna be different than when you're done breastfeeding or when you've given your body some time to heal. So just be mindful of that. And that's again why I feel like women should be checked newly postpartum so they can be proactive, but then continue on. I was just talking to my massage therapist about this. I was like, I haven't been checked in about a year and a half. I wouldn't mind going to see, just because the more we know about our bodies, then we can use the corrective exercise to fix whatever it is. But thankfully with my massage therapist, she sees the barriers in my body, such as our hips. Our hips are directly connected to the function of our pelvic floor. So if you have hip pain, deep butt pain, that could be associated with tight pelvic floor and a weak pelvic floor too. So don't discount those symptoms as well, because those are directly connected to your pelvic floor. Okay, so like I said, make sure to check the caption down below for a more in-depth breakdown of tightness versus weakness. But again, make sure you go in to see your pelvic floor PT that can do an internal exam to really give you a true diagnosis of what's going on with your pelvic floor. Now, there are some things that we can do without knowing. And like I said, like if you're not able to get into your pelvic floor PT, understanding these symptoms, which camp do you fall in? So if you have symptoms of both, which is extremely common, but you have more symptoms, say on the tightness side, then you're gonna lean more towards tightness. You're gonna address the tightness first and then go with the activation. So like I said, I don't prescribe straight kegels. We do what's called a co-contraction, but the number one thing is focusing on your breath, because our breath is what helps to spread the load. It's important for diastasis recti, it's important for leaking, it's important for prolapse when it comes to healing, because the breath naturally lengthens our muscles and naturally activates the muscles. And it's not just our pelvic floor, it's our abdomen, it's our back. And so we need to make sure that we incorporate our breath into our routine. So here's what happens when you have some tension. So I'm gonna use my son's, this is actually my squishy ball, but my son chose to claim it. All right, so if you have, like I said, most people will have tension in the back of the pelvic floor. And so basically what happens is you squish this and this displaces the pressure somewhere else, right? And so if you have tension in the posterior chain or the posterior, the back of the pelvic floor, this is gonna put pressure onto your bladder. And so that's why it might not be front pelvic floor tension that's causing the leaking, but back pelvic floor tension, because all of this pressure is going out onto the bladder, which is causing some of those leaking. And so that's why it's important to address the pressure or the tension in the back. Same is true for a prolapse. So if you have prolapse, but you also have tightness, think about it, you have all these organs that sit in your abdomen and sit in your pelvis, right? And your pelvic floor muscles hold up. The responsibility is to hold up these organs, so they work to hold them up. And so this is why a lot of the times women will go get a hysterectomy and then they come to me because they have now prolapse symptoms, because their pelvic floor no longer has something to hold up anymore. So just be mindful of that when it comes to surgery and things, and just educate yourself the best that you can before you go and under the knife. Okay, so think about it, you know, once, if you have tightness back here, that's gonna shove that tailbone under, right? So if you have posterior pelvic floor tightness, that's gonna shove the tailbone under, which is going to prevent your bowels from coming out, right? So if tension, no matter how much fiber and water you have, the bowels cannot smoothly move out because it's blocking it. It's creating that tension. So that's why a lot of times, like when somebody says they have constipation, I'm like, okay, great. Yes, fiber can be helpful, but we really need to address the tension, because no matter how much fiber and water you do, you could still have, you know, a blockage there. Okay, so what I like to think is that if, again, like, so for a rectocele prolapse, I feel like that's more common than not, but you know, usually if you have one prolapse, you have more. So like me, I had a cystocele and a rectocele prolapse. So when you have this pressure and tension back here, that's gonna push and displace the tissue somewhere else. And so tension in the pelvic floor can actually make your prolapse seem or feel worse. And that's why doing more kegels is not going to be helpful. It's actually gonna make things worse, because if you keep clenching and tucking, then this is going to continue to create tension and push the tissue elsewhere. So that's why it's really important, especially when it comes to prolapse. The biggest thing for me was releasing that tension to heal my prolapse, to get back to where I needed it to go. All right, so then let's talk about tension when it comes to diastasis recti. If you have tension in the bottom or in your pelvic floor, you can see that by the compression of the bottom of the pelvis pushes out onto the abdomen. And what I, again, more often than not, is that I also see tension in the back, okay? So not only, so you got your abdomen here, right? So you've got tension in the pelvic floor, tension in the back, you're hitting a wall. So when you breathe, that wall is being hit, and so then all of this pressure is going out onto your abdomen. And so a lot of people don't think, oh, I just have diastasis recti, I don't have pelvic floor issues. Well, this is why you need to get checked, because your pelvic floor could be keeping your diastasis recti from healing. And because all of that pressure, again, is just going displaced somewhere else. And so this is why I'm really big. I lean more towards helping women that, I guess I kind of play it in the way that most women have some kind of tension in their body, whether it's their hips, their glutes, their back, or their pelvic floor. We typically have tension. We lived in a stressful society and culture, in my personal opinion, and we hold stress somewhere, right? We all hold it somewhere, whether it's in our jaw, our necks, our shoulders, or down into our pelvic floor. And so getting rid of that tension is extremely important. So I know that's a lot. Like I said, I'm gonna make sure to comment down below the differences written out so you can kind of compare and then decide, okay, I fall into this camp or I fall into that camp. I do have 2 different videos on this channel for tension. So an 8-minute pelvic floor release workout and then an 8-minute activation workout or a strengthening workout. But you know, I want you to pay attention and do what you need to do. If you want a full length or a longer video on my process or my method on how to release tension, the 3 things that I do, or the 3 or 4 things that I would do as part of like my warm up before I go into my strength workout, make sure to comment down below and I'll create that video next. Also, please note that we also have a free guide for you. So make sure you download that free guide. In there, I do give a symptoms checklist so you can kind of go over it again to see what, which camp you fall into. And let me know what else you would like to see, and I'll see you in the next video.